a 4-year position. This is the final year, and we will continue to share the benefits of the strong economic growth with the most vulnerable in society.
Thank you. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Jim Cunningham.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, April marks 50 years since the launch of our longest sustained military operation, Operation Relentlessness, the beginning of our continuous at-sea deterrence. I'm sure all members from all sides of the House will want to join me in paying tribute to all the generations of Royal Navy submariners, their families who sacrificed so much, and all those involved in protecting our nation. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow marks 70 years since the founding of NATO. Let me assure the House that under this government, the United Kingdom will continue to play our leading role in NATO as it continues its mission of keeping nearly 1 billion people safe. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Jim Cunningham.
Thank you very much. Can I assure the Prime Minister I'm not going to raise Brexit? That will be raised later on. But I'm also going to raise another very important issue. Consultants and doctors in my constituency at the University Hospital have raised the issue regarding the NHS pension scheme tapered annual allowance for doctors and consultants. The consequences are doctors retiring early, turning down additional shifts, fear of paying high tax bills to the government's annual allowance taper, resulting in longer waiting times for patients, shortage of doctors and consultants. Will she raise this with the Chancellor as soon as possible and inform me regarding her answer?
Prime Minister.
I'm aware of the issue that he has raised, and in fact the Chancellor of the Treasury are already in discussion with the Department of Health and Social Care on this very issue. He will have noticed the Chancellor is on the bench and has heard the point that he has raised, and I'll make sure that what comes out of those discussions is that we can confirm that to the honourable gentleman.
Sir David Amis.
Loyalties being severely tested. Is my right honourable friend aware that as the country and the world ponders if Brexit means Brexit and if we are going to make a success of it, Southend-on-Sea has been welcoming ambassadors from all over the world to work in partnership and investment, looking at our pier and building a new marina. So will my right honourable friend consider bringing forward a meaningful vote, for which I believe there is a majority in the House, that Southend-on-Sea be declared a city?
Prime Minister.
I should just say congratulations to my honourable friend for so cleverly working in the claim of Southend to become a city. But can I also say to him how important it is, as he says, that we see that investment coming into our country, the benefits and the opportunities when we have got over this stage, when we've delivered Brexit, for building that better Britain, for building that better future, including in Southend-on-Sea, will be there. It's for all of us to ensure that we can get over this stage, get a deal through, get to Brexit, deliver on Brexit, build that better future, of which I'm sure Southend will be a leading part.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in wishing the people of Southend well, and I hope it does become a city. Is that OK? Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's offer for talks following the meetings that I've held with members across this House, and look forward to meeting her later today, and I welcome her willingness to compromise to resolve the Brexit deadlock. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister began her premiership, she promised to resolve the burning injustices facing this country. So can she explain why, by the government's own official figures, poverty has risen for all ages under her administration?
Minister.
No one in government wants to see poverty rising, and we take this very seriously indeed. But as I've said previously to the right honourable gentleman, the only sustainable way to tackle poverty is with a strong economy and a welfare system that helps people into work. And that's why it's important that we have the lowest unemployment since the 1970s, that we have the number of homes where no one works is at a record low. But we also need to make sure that work pays. And if I just give the right honourable gentleman some figures, in 2010, under Labour government, someone working full-time on the national minimum wage would have taken home £9,200 after tax and national insurance. Now, thanks to our tax cuts and the biggest increase in the national living wage, they will take home over £13,700. That's £4,500 more under a Conservative government.
Mr. Speaker, official figures show that since 2010, child poverty has increased by 500,000, working age poverty by 200,000 and pensioner poverty by 400,000. And while she's right to mention the national minimum wage, something her party strongly opposed the introduction of, I think we should just be aware of what the national minimum wage actually means. It's £8.21. For over 25s, it's £8.21. For 21 to 24-year-olds, it's only £7.70. And for apprentices, it's just £3.90 an hour. These are poverty wages. Mr. Speaker, there are now 8 million people in this country in work and in poverty. Many on middle incomes are struggling to make ends meet. Universal credit is failing. Will the Prime Minister, at the least today, halt the rollout of universal credit and agree to a thorough review of it?
Prime Minister.
As the right honourable gentleman knows, as we've been rolling out universal credit, we have been making changes to it. We changed one of the early measures that we took when I became Prime Minister was to change the taper rate. We have since abolished the 7-day waiting. We have ensured that we've taken action to make it easier for those who are transferring onto universal credit in relation to their housing benefit. But crucially, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, there is only one way to ensure that we see a sustainably deal with the issue of poverty. That is to ensure... Well, no. Oh, I'll come on to that, as the honourable gentleman has shouted that. That is to ensure that we have a strong economy that delivers jobs and better jobs for people, and that they can keep more of the money that they earn. And what do we know would happen? Well, from behind him, from a sedentary position, one of his honourable friends says the answer is a Labour government. A Labour government that would spend £1,000 billion more than this has been proposed. A Labour government that would put up taxes. A Labour government. A Labour Party that has opposed tax cut after tax cut. That's how you help working people. Tax cuts keep people in work, better jobs, high employment. That's under the Conservatives.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, for a government that rolled out austerity and has caused such poverty across the country, she really ought to think for a moment about what she's just said. The last Labour government halved child poverty. The last Labour government brought in children's centres, brought in Sure Start. The last Labour government reduced poverty across the whole country. She seems to be ignoring the true impact of universal credit. The Trussell Trust says that in areas where universal credit has been rolled out, food bank use has increased by over 50%. This week we also learned that another 400,000 pensioners are in poverty compared to 2010. So why is the Prime Minister pressing ahead with cuts to pension credit for couples where one is of pension age and the other is not?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, it is under a Conservative government that we've seen the triple lock on pensions that has provided increases, good increases for pensioners year after year. It is under this Conservative government that we have seen the introduction of the new pension arrangements for individuals who are pensioners. And let's just remember what we saw under a Labour government. It's not under a Conservative government that we saw a 75p rise in pensions. It was under Labour.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Last Labour government lifted 2 million pensioners out of poverty. This government's put 400,000 more into poverty. And Age UK, who I think know a thing or two about this, says that this proposal by the government is a substantial stealth cut. This year, 15,000 pensioner households could be up to 7,000 per year worse off as a result of this stealth cut. And I'm pleased the Prime Minister mentioned the triple lock, because at the last general election the government alarmed older people by pledging to scrap the triple lock and the means-tested winter fuel allowance. Can the Prime Minister give an unequivocal commitment this is no longer government policy and it won't be in the next Tory manifesto?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we have given our commitments to pensioners. We are clear. We are keeping those commitments to pensioners. What we've seen under Conservatives in government is the basic state pension rise by over £1,450 a year. That is in direct contrast to what a Labour government did for our pensioners. We want people to be able to live in dignity in their old age, and that's what this Conservative government is delivering.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole generation of waspy women will be pretty alarmed at the lack of action by this government and the lack of justice for them. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, over 1 million over 75s currently receive a free TV licence, a scheme established by the last Labour government. This government transferred the scheme to the BBC without guaranteeing its funding. Will the government take responsibility and guarantee free TV licences for the over 75s?
We've been clear what we expect the BBC to do, and frankly, I think the BBC is in a position to be able to do that with the income that they receive.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, the last Labour government guaranteed free TV licences for the over 75s. This government appears to be outsourcing that policy to the BBC. I think it should be an item of public policy, not sent to somebody else to administer on behalf of the government. Mr. Speaker, the last Labour government lifted 2 million pensioners out of poverty. 2 million children were lifted out of absolute poverty, and homelessness was cut in half. Contrast that with this government, which has put 500,000 more children into poverty, 400,000 more pensioners into poverty, and doubled homelessness. This, by this government, is a political choice. There is nothing inevitable about rising poverty, homelessness and soaring food bank use in the 5th richest country on earth. So yes, let's work to try and resolve the Brexit deadlock. But, Mr. Speaker, unless this government tackles insecure work, low pay, rising pensioner poverty, her government will be marked down for what it is, a failure in the eyes of the people of this country.
Prime Minister.
First of all, say to the right honourable gentleman, he quoted the last Labour government. I didn't realise he was such a fan of the last Labour government. He seemed to spend his entire time voting against it when it had a Labour government. But let's just talk about what is happening under this government. Record rate of employment, wages growing at their fastest for a decade, debt falling, a long-term plan for the NHS, the biggest cash boost in the NHS's history, skills-based immigration system, more money for police, for local councils, for schools, the biggest upgrade in workers' rights for over 20 years, freeing councils to build more homes, world-class public services, better...
Order! Mr. Russell-Moyle, you are behaving in a truly delinquent fashion. Calm yourself, young man. I had to have words with you yesterday. You're a bit over-eager. It's not the sort of thing I would ever have done as a backbencher. The Prime Minister!
World-class public services, better jobs, more homes, a stronger economy, Conservatives delivering on the things that matter.
Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, as this week is World Autism Awareness Week, can I ask my right honourable friend to encourage all government departments to follow the examples being set by the MOJ, DWP and Department of Health, who are taking initiatives to improve their engagement with people who have autism and their families? Can I also ask her to endorse the Autism Awareness Training Course for members of Parliament being offered through the All-Party Parliamentary Group and the National Autistic Society, which will be held in this House on the 1st of May. As we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Autism Act, it would be good to see every MP go through this training course to better help their constituents.
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for the work that she did to bring in the Autism Act. It was very important. It was groundbreaking. It was the first piece of parliamentary legislation to be linked to the condition of autism. And I'd also like to thank my right honourable friend and the members of the APPG for their work on this important issue, including highlighting Awareness Week, but also for ensuring that autism training is available for members of Parliament. And I hope, as she says, that members across this House do take that up. We are reviewing our autism strategy to ensure it remains fit for purpose, because we want to know what's working and where we need to push harder to transform our approach. So we will be continuing to look at this issue. My right honourable friend rightly highlighted it in the work that she did on the Autism Act, and I welcome and congratulate her on the work that she continues to do on this issue.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is well known that the SNP supports a people's vote and have supported revocation. But all the way through this process, right back to 2016, the SNP and the Scottish Government have sought compromise. We have published document after document Scotland's place in Europe. We know that Michel Barnier has read it. He said it's an interesting document. Why does the Prime Minister continue to ignore Scotland's voices? Why she has restricted herself to inviting the Leader of the Opposition? Why has she not invited the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government into formal talks? Why is it that Scotland's voices are being ignored by this Prime Minister and this Government?
Prime Minister!
Honourable gentleman, I'm actually meeting the First Minister of Scotland later today, and we'll be talking with her about the event of Scotland. And I'm always happy to...
Right honourable gentleman asked the question. The Prime Minister is answering it. Let us hear fully and courteously the answer. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I say, I'm meeting the First Minister of Scotland today. I'm meeting the First Minister of Wales later today. But the right honourable gentleman says, why had I offered to meet with the Leader of the Opposition? I'm happy to meet with members across this House to discuss the Brexit issue. But I think I'm right in saying that the Leader of the Opposition and I both want to ensure that we leave the European Union with a deal, whereas, of course, the right honourable gentleman, as he's just said, has a policy of revoking Article 50. That means not leaving the European Union at all.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, what I did ask about was formal talks. I'm well aware that my friend and colleague is meeting with the Prime Minister this afternoon. But I will say this to the Prime Minister.
Order. Now, members are becoming very overexcited. Very overexcited. The right honourable gentleman has a right to be heard, and he will be heard. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me make it clear that the voices of Scotland will not be shouted down by Conservatives in this House. The important factor here, Prime Minister, is you're having formal talks with the Leader of the Opposition. Scotland will not accept a Tory or a Labour Brexit. Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, and we simply will not be dragged out against our will. Will the Prime Minister now engage in formal talks with the Scottish Government, with the Scottish National Party and other opposition parties to make sure our voices are heard, and that desire to stay in the European Union, the best deal for all of us, is listened to and is respected?
I've just said to the gentleman, as he knows, because he and I have met before and talked about these issues, as I have done with other party leaders across this House. I'm always happy to meet party leaders across this House, but I want to find a way forward. I want to find a way forward that delivers on the referendum, that delivers Brexit, and does it as soon as possible, that does it in a way which means we don't have to fight the European parliamentary elections, and does it in an orderly way for this country. And he talks about voices from Scotland. I can assure him there are indeed strong voices for Scotland in this House. They sit on the Conservative benches.
Nigel Adams! Mr. Nigel Adams!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, can I urge her, on behalf of all the people of Selby, to put her weight behind the campaign for step-free access for Stelby railway station. I'm sorry to disappoint colleagues of my line of This is very important, Mr. Speaker, for the people of Selby. It is totally unacceptable that in this day and age, those that are unable to walk upstairs, people with disabilities, are denied access to public transport. And the people of Selby demand action.
Prime Minister!
First of all, can I thank my honourable friend? Can I thank my honourable friend for his service as a government minister since 2017? He's worked extremely hard, serving as both a Wales Office Minister and a government whip simultaneously, and I'm sorry that he has resigned. But can I also thank him for raising the important issue of access at public transport, and particularly at stations for people with disabilities. He asked me to add my weight. I have to say to my honourable friend, his considerable weight has been behind this campaign for a long time, and he has been promoting this.
Order, the Prime Minister referring to the Honourable Gentleman's qualities as a campaigner. That's what she was saying. She wasn't looking at him when she said it. She was saying it on the basis of her knowledge of the Honourable Gentleman. The Prime Minister.
As I say, Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend has been campaigning on this issue and campaigning hard on it for some time. And can I just say to him that I understand that the Department for Transport will be announcing the stations that are going to benefit from this funding tomorrow. So if he could just have a little patience and wait for that announcement.
Owen Smith.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister sits down later this afternoon with my right honourable friends, the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Brexit Secretary, she will hear no doubt that Labour's policy on Brexit is to secure membership of a customs union, the single market, and crucially, to get a people's vote on any deal. If she accepts that compromise, she can pass her deal and leave office. Will she do so?
Prime Minister!
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that the purpose of meeting with the Leader of the Opposition today is indeed to look at those areas that we agree on. I think there are actually a number of areas that we agree on in relation to Brexit. I think we both want to deliver leaving the EU with a deal. I think we both want to protect jobs. I think we both want to ensure that we end free movement. I think we both recognise the importance of the withdrawal agreement. What we want to do now is to find a way forward that can command the support of this House and deliver on Brexit, deliver on the result of the referendum, and ensure that people can continue to have trust in their politicians at doing what they ask us to do.
Suella Braverman.
Robert Small and David West were two young men from the Fareham area with their whole lives ahead of them. While suffering with mental health problems and under the care of Southern Health, they tragically took their own lives. Few can imagine the grief endured by their families, but they have since been campaigning for change at Southern Health, which has struggled with systemic issues and problems for some years. Will my right honourable friend reassure me that the government will work with Hampshire MPs and myself so that we can secure vital changes at Southern Health so that tragedies like this may be avoided?
Well, can I thank
Prime Minister
for raising this very important issue, and may I say that I would like to extend my deepest sympathies to the families and friends of the Honourable Lady's constituents who she's referred to in her question. This is an important issue. These incidents are very concerning. It is right, I understand the local trust and the county council have pledged to work more closely to resolve issues, but we do want to ensure that we are transforming mental health services around the country, and we remain absolutely committed to that. And of course we are providing record investment for these services. We have an ambitious plan in relation to increasing the workforce and ensuring that we're dealing with these issues. But I can reassure my honourable friend that action will be taken to ensure that we can prevent incidents of this sort from happening in the future. These were terrible incidents, and our sympathies are with the family and friends of the victims.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, there is a reception in Parliament to honour the 51 Muslims killed in Christchurch. In the wake of this horrific terror attack, mosques were targeted in Birmingham and Newcastle. There is a global rise in Islamophobia, including in the ranks of the Tory party. In an article for the Times this week, their chairman could not even utter the word Islamophobia. How can they deal with a problem they can't even name? I asked the Prime Minister for the third time, when will the Conservative Party conduct an inquiry and adopt the APPG definition of Islamophobia?
Prime Minister!
Gentlemen, as I believe I have said to him before, when any allegations are made, allegations of Islamophobia, allegations of complaints are made about Conservatives, elected Conservatives, people in the Conservative Party that are made to the Conservative Party, we look at those very seriously, and action is taken in relation to the individuals. He referred to the attacks that have taken place against mosques. I absolutely condemn attacks that take place against mosques and against any place of worship. I'm pleased to say that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has increased the funding that is available to support places of worship, to protect them from attacks that take place. This has no place in our society, and we should all be working to ensure that people can go to their place of worship and can feel that they are safe and secure in this country.
Mr. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does it remain the position of the Prime Minister that the Leader of the Opposition is not fit to govern?
Prime Minister!
Yes, I hope my right honourable friend will have heard from the remarks I made about what I think a Labour government would do in relation to the economy, that I do not think that the Labour Party should be in government. It is the Conservatives that are delivering for people, and the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, and I have different opinions on a number of issues. And if I may just highlight one issue. When we suffered a chemical weapons attack on the streets of Salisbury in this country, it was me as Prime Minister, this government, that stood up against the perpetrators of that attack. The right honourable gentleman said he preferred to believe Vladimir Putin than our own security agencies. That is not the place of somebody who should be Prime Minister.
Jonathan Edward.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mr. Speaker. The British government is in meltdown. Westminster is completely dysfunctional. And this morning, the Wales office lost its fourth minister in a year. Who could possibly say that Westminster works for Wales?
Minister. The honourable gentleman, if you look at the funding that's been made available to Wales from this Westminster government, but he talks about the government of Wales. There are indeed issues that I think we should be focusing on. I mean, let's just look at the National Health Service in Wales under a Labour government. Yes, they point in that direction. Absolutely, they point in that direction. That's what we see where Labour are in office. A National Health Service that, for example, hasn't met its A&E target for over a decade.
Dr. Philip Lee.
Polling that has just been published, over 58% of the British public have expressed a wish to have a final say on the Brexit process. Does the Prime Minister acknowledge that with the ongoing impasse here at Westminster around Brexit, and despite her best endeavours to pass her deal, and indeed the ongoing endeavours of this House to find a compromise, that the British public are right to increasingly think that they should have a final say before proceeding with Brexit?
The Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, and I know how passionately he's campaigned on this issue for some time now, he refers to the deal that the government's put forward having been rejected. Of course, the Leader of the Opposition's deal has been rejected by this House. A second referendum has been rejected by this House. What I believe we should be doing is delivering on the result of the first referendum that took place, and that's why I will be sitting down with the Leader of the Opposition later today.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Georgia Stokes has 2 children with autism who have been unable to get the support they need and are therefore not at school because of incorrect diagnosis. Every child with autism is unique, and this is why awareness raising and education about autism is vital. 34% of children on the autism spectrum say that the worst thing about being at school is being picked on. This World Autism Awareness Week will the Prime Minister commit to speeding up the time between referral for autism and diagnosis, and will she promise to fund mandatory training for healthcare professionals so that parents like Georgia aren't left to fend for themselves?
Well, the Honourable Lady has again raised this important issue for autism, and I'm sure that as constituency MPs we all see cases where parents have found it very difficult to get the support for their children in relation to for their children who are on the autistic spectrum, and it is important that we ensure there is that awareness of this and the ability to deal with this issue. So she's raised an important issue. As I said in response to my right honourable friend, the member for Chesham and Amersham, we are looking again at our autism strategy because we want to ensure that we have got in place all we need to ensure that the support is there for those with autism.
Lee Rowley. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week in this chamber, the Prime Minister said the biggest threat to our standing in the world, to our defence and to our economy is the Leader of the Opposition. In her judgment, what now qualifies him for involvement in Brexit?
Prime Minister!
Can I just say to my honourable friend, every member of this House is involved in Brexit. I want to deliver Brexit. I want to deliver Brexit in an orderly way. I want to do it as soon as possible. I want to do it without us having to fight European parliamentary elections. To do that, we need to get an agreement through this House for the withdrawal agreement and a deal. And it is important. The House has rejected every proposal that has gone before it so far, as I've just indicated, in terms of various proposals, and a second referendum and revoking Article 50. So I believe what the public want is for us to work across this House to find a solution that delivers on Brexit, delivers on the referendum, and gives people their faith that politicians have done what they asked and have actually delivered for them.
Stuart Hosey.
After 2 years of Brexit deadlock, intransigence and a 7-hour cabinet meeting, the best the Prime Minister can do is invite the leader of the British Labour Party to become the co-owner of her Brexit failure. So let me ask her, had she been the leader of the opposition and invited into a trap like this, would she have been foolish enough to accept?
Prime Minister!
Across this House, I believe we all have a responsibility to ensure that we deliver Brexit. Across this House, we all have a responsibility to ensure that we do that as soon as possible. Horror and the devastation of these attacks is brought home when you sit down and listen to the families who have seen a young life, promising young lives, cut short in this tragic way. We are committed as a government, across government, to work not just across government, but with society as a whole, to deal with the scourge of serious violence that is taking so many young lives.
Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in June last year, I asked the Prime Minister to help fund the recycling of the 20 old nuclear submarines tied up and rotting in Devonport and Rosyth. Today's NAO report shows that MOD has no funded plan to do this work, and no submarines have been dismantled since 1980. That was the year I was born. Will the Prime Minister now extend the civil nuclear clean-up to make sure that it includes all the Royal Navy submarines so we can deal with this and make that part of her legacy in office?
Prime Minister.
Honourable gentlemen, we do remain committed to the safe, secure and cost-effective defuelling and dismantling of our nuclear submarines as soon as is practically possible, and the MOD continues to act as a responsible nuclear operator by maintaining its decommissioned nuclear submarines to meet necessary safety and security standards. And I think its commitment is illustrated by the recent success in the initial dismantling of the submarine Swiftsure, which has been followed immediately by the initial dismantling of Resolution. So the MOD will continue to work with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority to achieve steady-state disposal of our laid-up submarines as soon as possible. We are working on this. The Labour government had 13 years as well. And what work did it do during those 13 years on this decommissioning issue?
Dr. Julian Lewis.
There is a Conservative Prime Minister who repeatedly told us that no deal is better than a bad deal, now approaching Labour MPs to block a WTO Brexit when most Conservative MPs want us to leave the European Union with a clean break in 9 days' time.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I was absolutely right, no deal is better than a bad deal, but we've got a good deal. And we had a chance last Friday to ensure that we would leave the European Union on the 22nd of May, and I'm grateful to all those colleagues who supported that motion. Some of them, I know, did it with a very heavy heart. But I want to ensure that we deliver Brexit. I want to ensure that we do it in an orderly way, as soon as possible, without fighting European elections. But to do that, we need to find a way of this House agreeing the withdrawal agreement and agreeing the way forward. And that is on that basis that I have been sitting down with members across the House and will continue to do so in order to ensure that we can find a way forward that this House can support.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Grace Warnock is a young East Lothian constituent of mine who has Crohn's disease. Using accessible toilets, she's faced negative comments and abuse from adults. But this inspired her to create Grace's Sign to remind everyone that there are people with invisible disabilities who have every right to use accessible toilet facilities and that society should have a heart. Will the Prime Minister join me in endorsing Grace's campaign to standardise toilet signage to ensure that anybody with a disability feels able to use accessible toilets without abuse?
Prime Minister.
Honourable gentleman, can I commend Grace for the work that she's been doing on this issue. Sadly, coming out of her own personal experience, I think he's raised a very important issue. We do want to make sure that people with those invisible disabilities are able to access public toilets and do so in a way that does not lead to the abuse that sadly Grace suffered. And I fully recognise the campaign that she's fighting, and I think it's an excellent campaign.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Sleaford and North Hykeham, like myself, like the country, voted for Brexit and want to see it delivered. I understand the Prime Minister says that we have to look at the balance of risk. Indeed, I've looked at the balance of risk myself and supported her deal, and I urge others in our party to do so. But, Prime Minister, if it comes to the point when we have to balance the risk of a no-deal Brexit versus the risk of letting down the country and ushering in a Marxist, anti-Semite-led government, what does she think at that point is the lowest risk?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, can I thank her for the support that she's shown for the government's deal and for the encouragement she is giving to others to support that deal. What I want to see is that we are able to deliver for her constituents and for others across the country, that we, as I say, deliver Brexit and do it as soon as possible. And in delivering Brexit, we need to ensure that we are delivering on the result of the referendum. That's what I said yesterday, and that's what we will be looking to do.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister stated last night that she will meet the Leader of the Opposition. Can the Prime Minister indicate, for the benefit of my party, the Democratic Unionist Party, but also for all members of this House, which of the opposition leaders' Brexit policies does she think that she could accept?
Well, can I say, first of all, I'm going to be in discussion with the Leader of the Opposition, but I think, as I indicated earlier, I think the Leader of the Opposition and I both want to deliver leaving the EU. I think we both want to deliver that with a deal. I think we both agree that the withdrawal agreement should be is a part of any deal. I think we both agree that we want to protect jobs, that we want to ensure that we have high standards of workers' rights in doing that. I think there are a number of areas on which we agree. The question is, can we come to an agreement that we can both support, that would command the support of this House? And that's what the talks will be about.
Sir Henry Bellingham.
Mr. Speaker, 70 years after the founding of NATO, will she find time today to look at the situation regarding Northern Ireland veterans, some of whom are being arrested and charged with murder nearly 50 years after the alleged events, and where there is no new evidence? What signals does this send to youngsters looking to join the armed forces? And will she try and make solving this part of her legacy?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I recognise the issue that he's raised, that obviously the concern has been shared by honourable members, our honourable and right honourable friends and others across the House. The current system for dealing with legacy in Northern Ireland, of Northern Ireland's past, is not working well for anyone. As I've said previously in this chamber, around 3,500 people were killed in the Troubles, and the vast majority were murdered by terrorists. And many of these cases require further investigation, including the deaths of hundreds of members of the security forces. So the system to investigate the past does need to change to provide better outcomes for victims and survivors of the Troubles, and to ensure that our armed forces and police officers are not unfairly treated. The Ministry of Defence are looking at what more can be done to ensure service personnel aren't unfairly pursued through the courts in relation to service overseas, including considering legislation, and we continue to look at how best to move forward in relation to these issues of the legacy in Northern Ireland.
Stephen Doughty.
Speaker, South Wales Police are doing a brilliant job in spite of pressures in Cardiff South and Penarth, dealing with knife crime, drugs, domestic violence and so much more. But they don't get capital city funding like other capitals, which makes the pressure worse. Will the Prime Minister look at this urgently again, and would she agree with me that we'd be better off spending billions on our police instead of Brexit?
Minister.
I say to the honourable gentleman, I understand that South Wales Police have been given extra funding in relation to dealing with knife crime. I think this is important that we deal with this issue. He's raised. I think it's also important that we actually raise Brexit, that we do deliver on the result of the referendum, and that we do what is necessary to ensure that we're prepared for leaving the European Union, which is exactly what the government is doing. But we are putting a focus on the issue of serious violence, and as witnessed by the Knife Crime Summit that we held earlier this week.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, in agreeing with the 14 members of the Cabinet who are happy for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union next week, can I ask my right honourable friend if she will set out her vision for the benefits that will come to the United Kingdom of no deal?
Prime Minister.
I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, that he should not believe everything that he reads in the newspapers. The Cabinet came to a collective decision yesterday. And secondly, I've always been clear that I think the opportunities for the United Kingdom outside the European Union are bright. I believe we can build that Great Britain, that Greater Britain, that brighter future for everybody. I believe we will do that better by leaving with a good deal. I believe we have a good deal, and that's why I have been working to ensure that we can leave, do so as soon as possible, do so in an orderly way, and build that brighter future.
Nasha.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, despite the repeated efforts of my honourable friend from Manchester Gorton and others calling upon the Prime Minister to adopt the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims' definition of Islamophobia, the Prime Minister refuses. Despite repeated calls for an independent inquiry into institutional racism, Islamophobia in the Tory party by the former Chair Baron Swarsi, the Muslim Council of Britain and their own Conservative Muslim Forum, the Prime Minister again refuses. Mr. Speaker, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, just a few days ago said, "I have never received an explanation, let alone an apology for the openly Islamophobic campaign the party ran against me in London 2016. and that the attacks on me still continue. Can I ask the Prime Minister, directly today, will she now show some leadership, at the very minimum, apologise to London Mayor Sadiq Khan for the Islamophobic campaign led by her party?
I say to the honourable lady, as I said in response to her honourable friend earlier, any allegations that are made in relation to the Conservative Party are investigated carefully by the Conservative Party, and action is taken. And it is this government that has actually been doing more to ensure that the police can deal with issues around hate crime, that has required. When I was Home Secretary, I required the police to actually ensure that they were recording properly incidents of hate crime that took place, so that we could better identify Islamophobia that was taking place. And I'm pleased to say that my right honourable friends, the Community Secretary and the Home Secretary, recently chaired a roundtable on anti-Muslim hate crime. This is being taken seriously by the Conservative Party and by the government.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I think it's worth everyone in this place remembering that for people outside there is far, far more to life than Brexit, as illustrated by many of the questions today. Now, in Loughborough, we're very proud of Loughborough University being the best university in the world for sports-related subjects. But one other group of athletes that have been much undersung in recent weeks is our Team GB athletes who took part in the Special Olympics in Abu Dhabi. 127 athletes returned with 169 medals, over 60 gold. Will the Prime Minister congratulate them, and does she think it might be time for the GB to host the next Special Olympics?
Well, I'll look very carefully at the suggestion that my right honourable friend has made in relation to the Special Olympics, but I'm very happy to join her, and I'm sure everybody across this whole House will, in congratulating our GB team on the significant haul of medals that they brought back from those Special Olympics. And can I also say how much we value the Loughborough University and the work it does on sports-related matters.
Erin Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Head teachers and governors in my constituency have cut school budgets to the bones. They're desperately concerned about the impact now on children. The Prime Minister's own advisers have been sent into schools, and as reported by Schools Week, their ideas are truly shocking. Reducing lunch portions for some of the most disadvantaged, holding back money for charities, even employing unqualified teachers. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that these suggestions belong in the days of the workhouse, not 21st century England?
Prime Minister.
The honourable lady knows that we are increasing the funding being made available to schools, 1.3 billion extra being made to schools, and I'm sure the honourable lady will want to welcome, as I do, that there are 22,500 more children in the Bristol Local Authority in good and outstanding schools since 2010.
James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And further to the question from my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, I thank the invitation that the Prime Minister extended to me for her knife crime summit on Monday. But would she agree with me that whilst numbers of police officers and powers of police officers are important, we also need to send a message to people who would never wear a T-shirt made in a sweatshop, look carefully at the air miles of the food that they buy, yet seem not to make the connection between the drug use that they have in their personal lives and the damage that's being done to young people in our streets. Will you send a message? It is not acceptable.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend raises a very important point. If we look at knife crime, the extent to which that is gang-related, the extent to which it is drug-related, many people across our society need to ask themselves what they are doing to ensure that we can deal with this issue of knife crime, what they are doing to ensure that we don't see these drug-related gangs committing these crimes, and that we are able to rid our society of what I believe to be a curse of drugs. I believe it has these impacts, it's bad, and that's why it's important that as a government we have a very clear drug strategy to take people off drugs to ensure that we are dealing with this issue. My honourable friend makes a very important point. It is not just a matter for government, it's not just a matter for police, it's for all of us across our society to deal with these issues.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, freedom of movement is a good thing. It's good economically. EU citizens exercising their free movement rights contribute to our GDP. It's good socially. Our communities are more diverse and they're more successful as a result. And it's good for our young people who can go to Europe to study and to work. Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister be honest about the benefits of freedom of movement and ensure that we retain those benefits?
Prime Minister.
the Honourable Lady. What we want to ensure is that we have a migration system that enables us to welcome people into this country on the basis of the skills they will bring, the contribution they will make to this country, not on the country that they happen to come from. When people voted to leave the European Union in 2010, they sent a clear message that they wanted things to change. One of the things they wanted to change was to bring an end to free movement and to ensure that it is the UK government that is able to make decisions about who can come to this country.
Evans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister seeks to get a short extension upon the short extension, will she make it absolutely clear to the European Union that if they turn round and say no, it has to be a long extension and you have to fight the European Union elections, that she will say no, no, no?
Prime Minister.
I say to my right honourable friend, we had the opportunity on Friday to ensure that we cemented that extension to the 22nd of May and left on the 22nd of May. As I've said earlier, I'm grateful to all those who supported that motion. As I said, some did that with some difficulty, with a very heavy heart. But what I want to see now is us able to find a position where we can, across this House, support the withdrawal agreement and a deal which enables us to leave on the 22nd of May, which enables us not to have to hold those European parliamentary elections. But we can only do that if we come together and find a way forward that this House is willing to support.
John Grogan.
Given that the Prime Minister and I are both fans of Geoffrey Boycott, who was perhaps not best known for compromise in his prime, but like many of us has mellowed with the years, and in the spirit of the times, will the Prime Minister find time in her busy diary to look at the compromise proposals for the important subject of Yorkshire devolution as advanced by the Mayor of South Yorkshire?
The Prime Minister!
I say to the honourable gentleman that we are looking seriously at issues around Yorkshire devolution. I know this has caused some concern, and there have been different opinions as to how that should be taken forward. And he references Geoffrey Boycott. Can I say one of the things that I always admired about Geoffrey Boycott was that he ensured that he stayed at the crease, he kept going, and he got his century in the end.
Mr. Kevin Olin-Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And further to the last question, once the Prime Minister has dealt with the rather tricky issue that is Brexit, which I'm sure she will she move on to the much more difficult problem, which is devolution in Yorkshire? Now that her Secretary of State has ruled out the devolution to the whole of Yorkshire, would she now consider a devolution deal to the York City region to include the City of York and the glorious county of North Yorkshire?
The Prime Minister.
Honourable friend, we recognise that there is, as I've just said, an enthusiasm, there's a dedication in Yorkshire to the concept of devolution and to the ability and the potential that devolution has to release and harness local people's sense of identity with Yorkshire and to be of ongoing benefit to people of Yorkshire. We do need to find the right proposals that will suit the area, and my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, I believe, has now met the Yorkshire leaders. Discussions are continuing with them about a different localist approach to devolution in Yorkshire from the one that did not meet our criteria, namely the One Yorkshire proposal.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Mr. Speaker, reports from the Cabinet yesterday suggest that there were two proposals put forward for cross-party cooperation to solve the Brexit crisis. One of them was to work with the Leader of the Opposition to deliver a Labour Brexit, and the other was to work with the 280 MPs across the House who will support her deal subject to a confirmatory referendum. Why does she trust the Leader of the Opposition more than the people?
What I want to do is ensure that we find a resolution of this that the House can support, such that we can deliver Brexit and deliver it in a timely fashion. I believe it's important to do that as soon as possible, and to do it, I want to do it without us having to fight those European elections. I believe it is absolutely right. The public would expect us to be willing to work across this chamber to find a resolution to this issue.
McLean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Conservative-led Redditch Borough Council have recently submitted their bid for the Future High Streets Fund. So will the Prime Minister add her support to this bid, because the people of Redditch deserve to have our town unlocked? And does she agree with me? It's only with Conservatives in our town hall that we can continue to unlock Redditch after years of Labour neglect.
Well, can I commend Conservatives, Conservative-led Redditch Council for the work that they're doing to unlock the town and to unlock the High Street. My honourable friend tempts me to support one bid over others, but there will be other of our honourable and right honourable friends who also would wish me to support the bids from their towns. It's important we've made this money available, and I congratulate Redditch Council under the Conservatives for all that they're doing to ensure the vitality of their town.
Mr. Nicholas Bowles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find myself in the slightly curious position, sandwiched between the Liberal Democrats and the Welsh Nationalists. And if I may, I would like to reassure my constituents and honourable members that I remain a progressive Conservative, while sadly an independent in this House. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's late conversion to compromise is welcome, but I'm sure that she will understand the scepticism of those of us who have been working on a cross-party compromise for many, many months. Can she reassure me that she will be entering these discussions with the Leader of the Opposition and other parties without the red lines that have bedevilled the Brexit negotiations so far?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, and I welcome the fact that he has indicated that he remains a progressive Conservative in his thinking on various issues. I approach these in a constructive spirit because I want to find a resolution of this issue. I want to ensure that we can do what people told us we should do, which is deliver Brexit, do it in an orderly way, and do it in a way that's good for this country.
Thank you. Order! Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liaison Committee of all the Select Committee chairs is the only committee that can call the Prime Minister. She has said on several occasions this afternoon that she's willing to sit down with members across the House, but I regret to say that despite repeated requests, the Liaison Committee has been unable to secure a date for a hearing with the Prime Minister. Could I please seek your advice, sir?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Lady can do and has done. I thank the Honourable Member, the Chair of the Liaison Committee, for giving notice that she intended to raise this matter on a point of order with me. I appreciate that the Prime Minister's diary will have been even busier than usual recently, but I am sure that the Prime Minister recognises that her regular appearances before the Liaison Committee form an important part of her accountability to Parliament. The Honourable Lady asks how she can persuade the Prime Minister to confirm a date. I suggest that by raising the matter today, the Honourable Lady may have helped to achieve that objective, and if not immediately successful, I have no doubt that the Honourable Lady will, following perhaps my repeated advice to colleagues, persist, and if necessary, persist again until she accomplishes her objective. Those sessions matter. They are part of respect for and the proper functioning of the legislature. Yes, indeed, I will come to other colleagues. We don't have a lot of time because we have to move on to other business, but I'll do my best. Point of order, Mr. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for taking this point of order at this stage in our proceedings. My concern is the accountability of Network Rail to Parliament. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that twice in the last month I have raised the issue of the closure of Suggett's Lane level crossing in my Cleethorpes constituency. Yesterday, Network Rail moved in to put up security barriers to close that crossing. This is despite objections from myself, from North East Lincolnshire Council, a petition signed by 4,000 residents, and a request from the Rail Minister to review their decision. In view of that, Mr. Speaker, can you offer guidance as to how I can hold, or how indeed Parliament can hold Network Rail accountable for this action?
My advice to the honourable gentleman is that he should obtain a copy of the official report, the transcript of today's proceedings, as soon as it becomes available, and he should send it with a robust, Lincolnshire robust, covering letter to Network Rail in the hope that Network Rail will respect the force as well as the sincerity of what he said and will in the process take due note of what the Rail Minister has said. If that effort is unavailing, again I suggest to the honourable gentleman, as I did to the honourable lady for Totnes, he should make the short journey to the table office to table questions. He should appear at the business question tomorrow, and he should, in all appearances before the Chamber, persist. Point of order, Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I crave your indulgence? With only sentencing left, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and every single member of this House for the kindness they've shown me over the last 2 difficult years. I'd also like to thank Robbie Mullins and Hope Not Hate, because without their actions I might not be here. I would also like to thank the parliamentary authorities, Plate, Lancashire and Merseyside Police, and my new family friends, that's the National and Lancashire Counter-Terrorism Unit, and thank them all for continuing to protect me. Beyond thanking so many kind people, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a serious point. I was to be murdered to send a message to the state, to send a message to this place. Members of this House are regularly abused and attacked. Our freedoms, our way of life, our democracy is under threat, and we must do our utmost to defend it. And whilst the Home Secretary is in his place, perhaps I might ask him to consider the diplock process for terrorist trials.
I hope I think the reaction, the spontaneous reaction on both sides of the chamber, joined in by the Leader of the House and other colleagues, speaks volumes. And I hope that I speak on behalf of the House in saying that we have the most enormous respect and admiration for the Honourable Lady. She has displayed courage and fortitude of which many people, and probably most of us, can only dream. In the most harrowing of circumstances, faced with an explicit and very real threat to her life from neo-Nazis, she has not wilted for a second. She has defended her own rights. She's defended the rights of her constituents, she's defended the rights of all of her colleagues, and she's defended the rights of Parliament as an institution. By this sort of poisonous, fascistic bile, we will not be cowed. And the sooner the purveyors of hate, of fascism, of Nazism, of a death cult realise that, the better. I salute the Honourable Lady, and I know others will do so too, led, I think, by the yes, of course I will come to the Honourable Gentleman, but led, I think, by the Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to pay on behalf of the government benches tribute to the Honourable Lady for her courage in facing this down, and we all absolutely stand with her.
Warmly thank the Leader for for what she's said, which I think speaks for us all, but the Home Secretary is indicating a willingness to take part. Please, the Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, take this opportunity to thank the Honourable Lady for what she's just said. She has the support of this whole House and beyond, and we all absolutely stand with every word that she's just shared with the House. Thank you.
The Leader of the Opposition. Point of order, Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the honourable member for the brilliant statement she's made today, for the incredible fortitude with which she stood up against this appalling threat, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your very clear declaration. We will not tolerate fascism and Nazism in our society. We will stand up for the pluralistic, multicultural, multi-ethnic Britain that we're all, I believe, very proud of.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Point of order, Khalid Mahmood.
Thank you, sir. I wonder if you could guide me as to how I can place on record the election of my honourable friend from Slough as the first BME member to be elected onto the NATO Assembly from this Parliament.
I completely understand. But I do apologise to the honourable gentleman. I can't listen to two things at once. I should have been listening to the honourable gentleman. Would he care just to put the point again very briefly?
I wonder if the Chair would guide me as so I can place on record the election of my honourable member from Slough as the first BME member on the NATO Assembly from this Parliament.
In fact, although the honourable gentleman has achieved his objective with me only once, as the honourable gentleman for Ronta indicates from a senator who said, well, I'm trying to get the pronunciation right. I'll have lessons from the honourable gentleman later. As far as the House is concerned, the honourable gentleman has achieved his objective twice, and I join those congratulations. As the House will know, I've often referred approvingly to President Moon, the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, to be able to record our admiration of the honourable gentleman for what is a first is a privilege, and I thank him for giving me the chance to do so. Point of order, Mr Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would you share my alarm and dismay about the footage that appeared on social media today depicting members of the parachute regiment firing weapons at an image of the Leader of the Opposition? This is an alarming situation because Parliament is actually supreme in our democracy, and the armed forces serve at the pleasure of Parliament as per the Bill of Rights. And as a former reservist as well, it flies in the face of all the values and standards that members of the British Army should uphold. And should this House not express its deep dismay and disgust at the conduct of those soldiers?
Absolutely. It should, and I believe that the honourable gentleman is doing so on behalf of colleagues across the House. My understanding is that the matter is being investigated. I believe I'm right in saying that the Ministry of Defence has signalled that an investigation will take place, and that seems to me to be absolutely right. What the honourable gentleman has said is 100% correct, and frankly, I would be horrified if our service personnel were to behave in such a way in relation to any member of this House or the representative of any political point of view embodied in a democratic political party. It's simply an unconscionable way to behave. So I entirely endorse what the honourable gentleman has said. I have no wish to raise the temperature, but rather in the most solemn way to underscore the importance and utter validity of what he has just said. Point of order, Mr Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise on a point of order to report the fact that the Hillsborough trial has concluded without the jury concluding the position, and I wonder if you've had any indication from the government yet as to their willingness or desire to bring a statement as to what happens now to honour the victims of the Hillsborough tragedy and make sure that those responsible are actually held to account.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman because the matter is of intense interest across the House, not to mention in very large parts of the country. The short answer is no. I've received no indication of an intention by a minister to make a statement to this House on the matter. However, ministers on the Treasury bench and the Patronage Secretary will have heard, or will very soon hear, what the honourable gentleman has said, and I should be very surprised if the matter is as he has described, and I have no reason to doubt what he says. A minister will not shortly to offer to come to the House to make a statement. The honourable gentleman is well familiar with what I might call the backstop option that he could deploy if he were concerned that a statement might not be forthcoming. And I'll leave it at that. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, I wondered if you'd had any notice of a statement to be made by the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, given the absolutely appalling news this morning that the government of Brunei is attempting to introduce stoning to death for members of the LGBT community, and given our very close links with Brunei, not least militarily, business and through the Commonwealth, would you not agree with me that such a statement would be very useful for the House?
Well, I agree. Such a statement would indeed be very useful. I've had no indication that the Foreign Secretary or one of his colleagues is minded to come to the House for that purpose. However, the honourable gentleman is an assiduous contributor to our proceedings, and I'm sure he will have noted that the matter was aired at questions to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the Chamber yesterday, and I sense that was very much, as one would expect, a cross-party feeling on the subject. I very much hope that it will be possible for this to be aired in the Chamber. I don't mind telling the honourable gentleman that there was an urgent question application on this matter earlier in the week. However, as I knew Foreign Office questions were coming, and we were very heavily consumed by other business, I declined it at that time. However, many people would judge that the matter remains urgent, and the opportunities exist for colleagues again, perhaps if I may use that analogy, to deploy the backstop option in order to ensure that there is a ministerial presence in the Chamber and focus on the matter very soon.
On that point of order.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Am I right in thinking it would not be possible to have a statement after 2 o'clock today when Parliament has sort of been taken over by the alternative government? Isn't that one of the problems of doing statements at the moment?
That is indeed a valid observation. The honourable gentleman is quite right as far as today is concerned. To be fair, I don't think I was, and I don't think the honourable gentleman would suggest this, signalling to the honourable gentleman for Cardiff South and Penarth that the matter could be aired by that mechanism, either of an urgent question or a statement today. But of course there is always the possibility of subsequent days. Thank you. Point of order, Sir Christopher Chope.
To the point of order raised by my honourable friend in relation to Hillsborough, can I put on record that the gentleman in question is one of my constituents, and this will be the second occasion on which he has faced a long trial which has not resulted in any verdict and resulted in the jury being discharged. And I hope that will be taken into account if anybody thinks that it's reasonable that such a person should be put through a third trial.
Well, I'd rather imagine that the point that the honourable gentleman has made on behalf of his constituent will be heard in the appropriate quarters. If the honourable gentleman is concerned that it might not be, and it is always possible for him to send the official report to those whom he believes need to read his words in it. And I think we'll leave it there for now. But I thank the honourable gentleman. It's a very serious point he's made of a legal character, and he's representing his constituent, and I respect that. Order. I remind the House that under the order of the House of the 1st of April, I must interrupt any proceedings at 2 p.m. when I will call a member to move the business of the House motion. I therefore intend to bring proceedings on the statement to a close at approximately 1:45 to allow time for the presentation bill and the 10-minute rule motion. Order. Statement. The Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Sajid Javid.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the Windrush Compensation Scheme. Copies of the response to the consultation are available from the Vote Office. The United Kingdom has a proud history of welcoming arrivals from around the world. We have long held open a door to those who want to come and help build a better country, including my parents, for example, or indeed the parents of the Shadow Home Secretary. And we have all benefited as a result, with the UK emerging as a stronger, broader, more vibrant and successful nation. We would not be the country that we are today without the men and the women who crossed oceans to come here legally, to make their homes, to work hard, to pay taxes, to raise their families. And we all know it. Which is why the whole country was shocked by the unacceptable treatment experienced by some members of the Windrush generation. People who have built their lives in this country, people who have done so much for this country, people who have every right to be in this country, they were told that they were not welcome. It was a terrible mistake, and it should never have happened. And that it did is a matter of profound regret to myself, to my department, to the government. That's why, just under a year ago, one of my first acts as Home Secretary was to stand at this dispatch box and to say sorry on behalf of successive governments. Sorry to the parents and the grandparents who suffered the trauma of being incorrectly ordered to leave the country they love. Sorry to those who had paid taxes here for decades only to be denied NHS care to which they were perfectly entitled. Sorry to hard-working men and women who were unfairly refused the right to work and even refused the dignity of a roof over their head. But I know that words alone are not enough, which is why, 11 months ago, I didn't just say sorry to members of the Windrush generation, I also vowed to right the wrongs that have been done to them. And I sincerely hope that this compensation scheme being unveiled today goes some way into doing that. It has taken longer than I would have liked, but if we are to deliver justice for the Windrush generation and their families, it is vital that we get this right. Today's scheme is the product of many months of work with affected individuals and their representatives, including well over 2,000 responses to our call for evidence and the consultation. We are also indebted to Martin Ford QC, who has provided us with invaluable independent advice and met with a great many of the individuals that were directly affected. His findings have contributed hugely to the final design of the scheme, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Martin for his work. As a result of this meticulous approach, I am confident that the proposals for the scheme are closely aligned with what affected communities wanted to see, namely that it is simple, it is accessible, and above all, it is fair. Full information is now available online and via a free telephone hotline number. Guidance is being provided to help people understand what compensation they might be entitled to and how to submit a claim. And the application process itself is as simple and as clear as possible. It has also been important to note that the scheme is not only open to those of Caribbean origin. The government proposes broadly to align eligibility with the Commonwealth Citizens Task Force. This means that Commonwealth citizens settled in the UK before 1973, along with certain children and grandchildren of theirs, are eligible to apply if they have losses to claim for. Other eligible groups include those of any nationality who have a right of abode or settled status or are now British citizens who arrived to the UK to live in the UK before the 31st of December 1988. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the historical nature of the wrongs done mean that some of those who have been affected throughout the years are sadly not alive to see justice being done. Where this is the case, we propose to accept claims from the estates of individuals who would themselves have been eligible had they not passed away, and from close family members of an eligible person. But justice will not be done if people don't know about the scheme or, for any reason, they are afraid to engage with it. So in addition to today's media coverage, we will launch an extensive programme of events with key stakeholders, community groups and faith organisations so that people across the country and overseas know about the compensation that they can apply for. On the 22nd of June, we will be marking the second annual Windrush Day, a celebration of everything that the Windrush generation and their descendants have contributed to in the UK. And later this evening, I will be welcoming community group leaders to Parliament alongside some of those who have suffered and their families. It will be an opportunity to reflect not only on the mistakes of successive governments brought to this point, but also on what we as a country can do to ensure that mistakes like this are never repeated. Wendy Williams' review will explore how members of the Windrush generation came to be treated like illegal migrants, and I look forward to receiving her recommendations. But there is no doubt that the roots lie in a historical policy that saw people given settled status without also being given the ability to prove it. Nothing we say or do will ever wipe away the hurt, the trauma, the loss that should have never been suffered by the men and women of the Windrush generation. But together we can begin to wrong the rights of Windrush. We can right the wrongs of Windrush. We can begin to turn the page on this sad chapter in our history, and we can do justice by people who have contributed immeasurably to our country. When the UK called out for help, thousands of people from the Caribbean and across the Commonwealth stepped up to help get us back on our feet. Now it's time for us to step up and do what's right by those that we have failed. I commend this statement to the House.
Diane Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for early sight of this statement, and I would also like to place on record our gratitude to Martin Ford QC and his colleagues for the advice he has provided. And I would like to say at this point that none of the delays in this process are attributable to him. We have to remember in this House how much pride the Windrush generation took in being British. We have to remember that they came here in good faith under passports which indicated to them that they were indeed British. And there are all the material challenges they faced as part of the Windrush scandal, but above all, having spoken to numbers of these people, there was the humiliation of being told year on year by the British state that somehow they were not British, they were not worthy, they were not deserving, and services they had paid into for years and years were not available to them. The reality is this is a scandal which should never have happened. It's a scandal where the government was initially slow to act. And it's a scandal where some members of Parliament deliberately muddied the waters with talk of illegal immigrants, when by definition none of the Windrush victims are here illegally. And it is a scandal which is set to continue unless and until the government ends its hostile environment. And it's a scandal which is set to multiply with the 3 million EU citizens because of the government's refusal to guarantee all their existing rights, and I'm sorry to say, the lack of preparedness at the Home Office. The Prime Minister previously told us she would fight burning injustices. Well, the Windrush scandal was a burning injustice, and it took place on her watch, first as Home Secretary and then as Prime Minister. Her successor as Home Secretary was obliged to relinquish her post because she incorrectly told this House there were no numerical deportation targets. We have since learnt that the member for Hastings and Rye had written to the Prime Minister promising to increase deportations by 10%. We also know that deportation numbers were a key performance indicator when she presided over the Home Affairs, and that the Home Office officials received bonuses for the numbers of deportees. It is hard not to imagine that these targets, this performance indicator, these bonus didn't affect the lack of care with which the Windrush generation was treated. The current Home Secretary told this House in April of last year, "I will do whatever it takes to put it right." He also said, "We've made it clear that a Commonwealth citizen that has remained in the UK since 1973 will be eligible to get the legal status that they deserve, British citizenship." Yet here we are. We know that there are many citizens from the Commonwealth who've been here since 1973 who have still not been granted British citizenship and are not treated as British citizens still. On this side of the House, we welcome the fact that the compensation scheme will be open to the estate of deceased Windrush generation persons and also to their relatives. This was an ageing cohort, and it's only fair that their relatives should be able to claim. We also welcome the fact that the Home Secretary accepts that this is not just about persons from the Caribbean. The Windrush generation is so called because of that emblematic symbol of the Empire Windrush, but actually it involves anyone from a Commonwealth country that came to this country between 1948 and 1972. And I believe that there are many more persons that will need to come forward if we really are going to clear up this scandal. I would like to ask the Home Secretary, can he say a little about the Hardship Fund, which was set up in response to pressure from my honourable friends to deal with the immediate issues faced by the Windrush generation? How much is available to the Hardship Fund as a whole? And is it true that thus far only 2 people have had payments from the Hardship Fund. On the compensation scheme itself, we're glad to have further details, but I believe it still falls short of what is expected, what is required and what is fair. Is Home Secretary able to tell the House how much is available for the compensation scheme as a whole? Is the Home Secretary willing to comment on the fact that the scheme will not compensate those who may have gone back to the Caribbean or elsewhere in the Commonwealth for a holiday or a funeral and were refused to, they were not allowed to get back on the plane? And that the document says it is difficult to whether inability to return to the UK is a loss. Of course it's a loss. That's an extraordinary thing to say. We know that people were wrongly prevented from returning to their home here. The Home Secretary admits that. One of the reasons was that they were unable to provide documentary proof of their status. Now the Home Secretary proposes to exclude them from compensation. These are people who are British citizens, unable to return home, and in some cases separated from their families. This is not ending the scandal, it continues it. The Home Secretary and this government proposed to make only a contribution to legal fees up to a fixed amount, but will not reimburse for fees higher than that amount. This is despite the fact that these legal costs are easily documented and were incurred in challenging wrongful loss of jobs, deprivation of public services, including the NHS, loss of home, wrongful detention and wrongful deportation. We note that there will be no compensation for private health care for persons living in this country who are unable to access the NHS care that they are entitled to. The remedies provided by the scheme include an apology and ex gratia payments. The government will make these compensation payments voluntarily without necessarily establishing a formal legal obligation. Surely there must be a formal legal obligation. I don't think we can...
Can I just very gently say to the Shadow Home Secretary, this is going to be talked out as things stand, because we've only got till 1:45 and there are probably 20 colleagues wanting to take part. Diane Abbott.
I'm grateful to the Speaker. Let me say, finally, there are persons in this House, and some of them are the children of the Windrush generation. And whether we're on the front benches or the back benches, whether we're in opposition or in government, we will not rest until this generation, one of the bravest generations, gets the justice to which they are entitled.
The Secretary of State for the Home Department. Sajid Javid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and also what she said about Martin Ford QC and the work that he has done to make this scheme a reality. And the Right Honourable Lady started by saying this should never have happened, and I absolutely agree with her and always have. And I think the whole House agrees with that. And, of course, none of these people that were caught up were here illegally. They had every right to be here. She's referred to the compliant environment. It is, I mean, sadly, when the Right Honourable Lady talks about this, she talks about it as though it's something that's an environment that's been put in place just since 2010. She knows that the rights to check on whether someone is here legally or illegally, it's something that there are a number of rules and regulations put in under the previous Labour government. And she talks about how people were affected. And again, it is worth reminding the House, because we are all trying to deal with this issue and provide justice. But it is worth reminding the House that when the historical review was done and it was determined that there were 164 people that were the most likely to have suffered detriment, almost half of those suffered that detriment under the previous Labour government. So it is just worth keeping in mind that successive governments have, in effect, caused this problem, and it is no good in this House just trying to point the finger at one particular government. The Right Honourable Lady talked about the EU settlement scheme, and it is precisely because of the lessons of Windrush we need a scheme that cannot be just declaratory in approach. We need to make sure that our EU friends that are here in this country, that they are properly documented. That is the abiding lesson from Windrush was the lack of proper documentation. And she's talked rightly about those who want to have UK citizenship, and she knows that we've set up a special route for that. Over approximately 4,000 people have taken advantage of that at no cost to themselves. And she's right that it's not just open to the people of Caribbean origin, and I'm glad that we agree on that. She asked me about the Urgent Exceptional Payments Fund, which was not supposed to be another compensation scheme. It's supposed to be just that urgent exceptional payments. It's not capped, and 9 payments, I understand, have been made so far. She asked me about this particular scheme and how much it's likely to cost. There's no cap to this scheme, so no one knows what the eventual cost will be based on the needs and the claims that are actually made by eligible people. But the baseline estimate of my department is approximately £200 million. She referred to legal fees and also private healthcare costs, and I can tell in both of those cases, whilst there's a tariff structure, both of those actually allow for actuals being paid in certain circumstances where proof is provided.
Suella Braverman.
My parents came to the UK in the late 1960s from Mauritius and Kenya, Commonwealth countries, and they came with no one and with nothing except a desire to make their lives in Britain and to serve our country, like many of our parents in this room. I welcome, they could have been caught up in this episode as well, and I welcome the Home Secretary's commitment, his action and his statement today. Does he agree that this compensation scheme represents real progress towards securing justice for the Windrush generation, and with the independent Wendy Williams Lessons Learned review being the next vital step in the process?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend, and can I take this opportunity to thank her parents and the parents of millions of others for the contribution that they've made to this country. And I also agree with her about the importance of the work that Wendy Williams is doing. It will be a vital step to making sure that we right the wrongs.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Of course, it is imperative that the victims of the Windrush scandal are compensated justly for the outrageous and disgraceful way that they have been treated. If this scheme delivers some sort of justice, then it will be welcome, but we need more information before we can finalise our judgment on that. I welcome what the Home Secretary says in relation to there being no cap on the scheme, because it needs to be the needs of victims and not the choices of the Treasury that drive the total amounts of compensation that will be payable. But can the Home Secretary explain exactly what it is that the Home Office will be compensating? Is it only financial losses, or will it also be the devastating impact on health and well-being and family relationships and other aspects of life that so many have suffered? And can he tell us whether claiming compensation will preclude victims from seeking other forms of redress from the Home Office, including through the courts? And will those 9 people who have been able to claim from the Hardship Fund, will they also be able to claim thereafter from the compensation scheme as well? Mr. Speaker, it is welcome that the compensation scheme is not restricted to Caribbean countries, but why is the Department not undertaking work to proactively find victims of the scandal from all Commonwealth countries, rather than restricting case reviews only to the Caribbean countries? The Home Office has ruined the lives of citizens from all round the Commonwealth. It should be proactively taking steps to fix and compensate in all of these cases. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary referred to the shock that the whole country had felt in response to Windrush, but it should not have been a shock to the then Home Secretary, now the Prime Minister, or her department, because it had been warned repeatedly that this was the inevitable consequence of the hostile environment. So we still need to know why the Home Office ignored even its own warnings and pressed ahead with the hostile environment regardless. So when will we see the Lessons Learned review published, and when will they start rolling back on the hostile environment policies like the right to rent?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I can again reiterate there is no cap on this scheme for all the right reasons. And he asked me about is it just financial losses? It's not just financial losses. So if there's other detriment suffered, for example, where people wrongly detained, the scheme, that's one example, will allow for that. The honourable gentleman asked me about the Urgent Payment Fund and whether those people will be eligible to apply under this scheme. Of course, absolutely, if they meet the eligibility criteria, and depending on the claim, there's no link in that way between the two schemes. And he's also pointed out that, I think, welcoming the fact that it's not limited to those that are just of Caribbean origin as Commonwealth citizens, but it's broader than that. And I think it's right that we have focused in the historical review on those that all the evidence has suggested are more likely to have suffered detriment, but it's also right that it's not just limited to Caribbean origin Commonwealth citizens. And also he's rightly pointed out the work of the Wendy Williams review, which is going to be vital to make sure we get everything right.
Traditionally slightly greater latitude for the chair of a select committee, but in view of the constraints of time, it would be appreciated if colleagues could confine themselves to single-sentence questions without preamble. Otherwise, lots of people will be prevented from speaking. Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent was unable to work for a considerable period of time, but that was then resolved thanks to the government taking action. But now he's struggling financially again because his wife is suffering from cancer. So how soon will he be able to claim? How easy is it to find the website? Because at the moment the links on gov.uk aren't completely clear to where to find the website. And how soon might he be able to get some money into his bank account to help him?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the situation of my honourable friend's constituent. The claims can begin from today. The information has just gone up. We've also set up a free-phone helpline. There's going to be a number of people in the Home Office that will be dedicated to this, and we want to make the payments and process the claims as soon as possible.
Yvette Cooper.
The Home Office took 6 months to agree to the urgent hardship scheme, 9 months to set out the policy for it, and within 12 months of the Windrush scandal had still only helped 2 people out of the 48 that had applied, and I understand it is now up to 9, despite the fact that there were serious urgent cases needing help. Can he tell the House what he's going to do to make sure that we don't see the same kinds of delays with this compensation scheme, which we all welcome the support that people are going to need?
Mr. Speaker, it's very important that we get this scheme right, and that was why we wanted to make sure we consulted with as many people as possible, and that's why we had the call for evidence first. And also, indeed, when Martin Ford, the independent assessor of the scheme, when he asked for extra time so he could meet with more community leaders, more people that were affected, I believe that we have got it right now, and I'm absolutely committed to making sure that those eligible receive their compensation as quickly as possible.
Douglas Ross.
Statement and the work his department have done to enact this scheme. When he responded to the Home Affairs Select Committee report on this issue on the 24th of July, noting the end of the consultation on the 11th of October, he said he wanted this scheme to be implemented as quickly and as carefully after that as possible. Can he just explain the period between the consultation closing and this announcement? Because some people are concerned it's taken 6 months, but to get it right, it was right that we took that time.
It's been very important, Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend, to make sure, I think, over some 1,400 responses we had to the consultation, which are quite high for any consultation. We wanted to make sure that they were all looked at carefully, that we worked closely with Martin Ford and others, and that the systems were in place from day one for when the compensation scheme goes live. Now that it is live, I believe that we will be able to process claims quickly.
David Lammy.
Will he undertake to publicise this scheme as widely as the EU settlement scheme? Will he ensure that there is no use of non-disclosure agreements as to how much somebody gets? And will he say if people with criminal convictions will still be entitled to using the scheme? Many people driven into poverty and therefore crime as a consequence of this scandal.
Mr. Speaker, we will absolutely be very widely publicising this scheme, and indeed the right honourable gentleman, I know he's very committed to providing justice for Windrush, for the Windrush generation, can help with his own Twitter feed and other ways, but he can absolutely help to make sure more and more people know about this scheme. He's asked me also, Mr. Speaker, about non-disclosure agreements. There will be no non-disclosure agreements under this scheme, and also he's asked me about those with the criminal convictions. They are entitled to apply into the scheme. It does say into the scheme if there are some individuals that apply that have serious convictions, the government reserves the right to change the amount of compensation not paid altogether, but generally no one is barred because of criminal convictions.
I heard the dignified evidence given to the Joint Human Rights Committee by some of the Windrush generation. I was astonished at the huge amount of documentation they provided and still being put into this position. What support is being given to those who are in the Windrush generation, or indeed anybody else who has all this evidence in front of them which is still dismissed?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise this, and I too cases where that I've looked at myself personally where that kind of outcome should not have happened. In this particular case, with the compensation scheme, we have made it as simple and as straightforward as possible. That's why, for example, in some payments we have both a tariff structure and an actual structure, trying to provide as much choice as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I represent the Windrush Borough of Lambeth, and many of our residents have been directly affected by this. His officials have actually come down to help implement some of the measures his department have introduced, but I have to say to him, his processes have been anything but simple and accessible for people to use. What confidence can he give us that this scheme will be any different?
Mr. Speaker, we have looked at how this scheme is going to be implemented very carefully. So, for example, that's why today, along with the online information, there's much guidance on how applications can work and how to make them easier. There's also this free phone telephone number. There'll be dedicated staff in the Home Office working on this scheme. The scheme is going to be open for at least 2 years, and as it goes, I also make a commitment to look at if there are any issues, if improvements can be made, if some can be suggested by honourable members even, we will absolutely look at those.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Victims of the Windrush scandal need to be compensated for all of their losses. Can the Home Secretary give me the assurance that this will include any trauma that has also been experienced?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, with the publication that we've made today, we set out carefully what type of the eligibility and what type of losses can be covered. And I believe that with the process of the consultation and with the support of Martin Ford, it's a very fair process.
Given the hostile environment was clearly one cause of the Windrush scandal, has the government accepted the recent High Court judgment against right-to-rent checks?
Secretary.
The right honourable gentleman may know that we are appealing that judgment.
Andrew Slaughter.
Will the Home Secretary look at the case of my constituent who has been refused an exceptional hardship payment, which she wanted to go and visit her 95-year-old mother with dementia and her father's grave in Grenada, and was told by his department to save up for it?
Secretary.
I'd be happy to take a look, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, will he extend a compensation scheme to highly skilled migrants wronged by the Home Office, and can he explain why those I've raised in the press have had their cases resolved and those who I have not raised in the press have not?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the eligibility for the scheme is very wide. I set it out earlier in my statement, and that will most certainly include many people that are highly skilled migrants.
Mr. Speaker, as well as this publicity drive that the Home Secretary has talked about, will his officials be going through with their fingertips every case of other Commonwealth citizens who are caught up in this?
Secretary.
We want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that no one is left out. We have, for reasons I've explained in the House before, focused on those of Caribbean origin, but that process of trying to find those that may have been wronged continues.
Emma Reynolds.
Will the compensation scheme cover the huge distress caused to those like my constituent Paulette Wilson, who was detained at Yarlswood and then the Heathrow Detention Centre and very, very nearly deported back to a country she hadn't been to since the age of 10?
Mr. Speaker, one category we have also included in the compensation is a discretionary category, because I was also well aware, whilst we can identify I'd be happy to look into that case.
Stephen Doughty.
Mr. Speaker, will the Home Secretary publish a comprehensive breakdown of all of those wrongfully detained or deported by his department as a result of the hostile environment, on top of the Windrush victims?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is well aware that very regularly we supply a letter to the Select Committee, and that contains much information on the scheme, and I'll take into account the suggestion he's made.
Joe Stevens.
There will be many, many victims of this tragedy who will be putting together very complex cases involving heads of loss across many areas. Will legal aid be available to those who need it?
Next question.
Mr. Speaker, we are looking carefully into what kind of support, if it's needed, because there will be some cases that are less complex. With the kind of case the Honourable Lady suggests, if they are complex, we want to make sure that people have help if they need to put those cases together, because we want to make sure that no one is denied justice and they can make a proper claim.
Point in the next. Jessica Morden.
Will the Secretary of State acknowledge that reassurances so far have not been enough for some people who are just too afraid to admit they have no status here? I know that from my constituency, and do more to reassure people to come forward.
Mr. Speaker, it's a very important point from the Honourable Lady in that we want to make sure that everyone feels they can come forward first with the Windrush scheme itself in terms of documentation and passports and the work the task force is doing, but also to make claims for compensation. So, for example, I've also said in this scheme that no information that if anyone comes forward with the compensation scheme will be supplied to immigration enforcement and any other issues and concerns people might have.
Liz McInnes.
Fixed address or a bank account be required in order to claim compensation, given that some will have been denied access to these under the hostile environment?
I would think it would be certainly helpful if someone's got a bank account in terms of making compensation, but what we have set out to do is to make sure justice is done, do it in the fairest ways possible, and if there are exceptional circumstances for people in how you pay compensation, we of course will take that into account.
Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Home Office fund independent legal advice for those Windrush citizens who may not be able to navigate the Home Office website system, or who may feel entirely unable to approach a department directly which has so comprehensively breached their trust?
Mr. Speaker, we have, as I mentioned a little earlier, tried to make this as simple as we can to navigate it with the guidance, with the free phone number. And if anyone finds themselves in that circumstance, I would suggest the first thing they do is call the free phone number.
66 of the emigrants carried on the HMT Empire Windrush were in fact Polish nationals, mostly relatives of those who'd fought for the Allies from El Alamein to Monte Cassino and beyond. Have they or their descendants been involved or consulted in any way during this process?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have a list of everyone who responded to the consultation. There were some 1,400, but I do know that it was wide-ranging and we had responses from many different nationalities.
Drew Hendry.
So the risk of a further Windrush is hundreds of thousands of EU citizens applying for the rights risk missing the deadline. Will he accept the cross-party calls to enshrine their rights in law to avoid this situation?
Mr. Speaker, it's precisely because we want to avoid another Windrush situation that it cannot be sufficient just to enshrine rights in law. What is needed with the EU settlement scheme is a proper process of documentation from day one.
Thank you. Order. Presentation of Bill. Joe Swinson.
Employment Rights, Shared Parental Leave and Flexible Working Bill.
Second reading what day? Friday the 5th of April 2019. Thank you. Order. 10-minute rule motion. Kerry McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to impose a duty on public bodies in relation to the welfare needs of animals as sentient beings. Mr. Speaker, the reason I am here today bringing in this bill is because back in November 2017, I added my name to an amendment to the EU withdrawal bill tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Brighton Pavilion. New Clause 30 called for the EU Protocol on Animal Sentience, as set out in the Lisbon Treaty, to be recognised in domestic law post-Brexit. As any MP will tell you, animal welfare issues are always popular with constituents, and this was no exception. There was a mass email campaign, vocal support from NGOs. It was very clear the public wanted the reassurance of putting this in that bill. The government, for reasons best known to itself, was less enthused and tried to argue that the concept of animals as sentient beings was already enshrined in English law, but the backlash was fierce. And there was a lot of press coverage suggesting that government MPs had voted that animals couldn't feel pain, which was slightly unfair. But as I said, the public was clearly unhappy, and the government was forced to act by bringing in a 3-clause draft bill, Animal Welfare Sentencing and Recognition of Sentience Bill, in December 2017. This was the government promising to the House that it would legislate. Indeed, the Prime Minister also said this. And it was promising that it would do so before Brexit Day, which we thought at the time would be March the 29th, 2019. The consultation on the draft bill closed on January the 31st, 2018. The Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, on which I sit, also carried out pre-legislative scrutiny and recommended splitting the bill so that the largely uncontroversial sentencing provision could be dealt with separately. I'm not focusing on the sentencing provision today, but I genuinely do not understand why the government hasn't been able to act in the intervening period to increase maximum jail sentences for animal cruelty from 6 months to 5 years. It would take a day of parliamentary time, it has public support, the government purports to support it too, so why not treat animal cruelty with the severity under law that it deserves? Yeah. To return to the chronology, it wasn't until August 2018 that DEFRA got round to publishing the outcome of the consultation on the draft bill, having apparently been overwhelmed by the public response with over 9,000 direct submissions and another 64,000 from 38 Degrees members. DEFRA took on board the EFRA Select Committee's recommendation to split the bill, but since then we've had nothing, just warm words and a lukewarm promise to legislate. In October last year, the Secretary of State told Tory Conference, "Animals are our fellow sentient beings. They show loyalty and devotion, and they know pleasure and pain." In February this year, at the Better Deal for Animals parliamentary reception, which brought together 36 of the UK's largest and most effective animal protection organisations, he said, "Animals are sentient beings who feel pain and suffering, so it is absolutely right that we recognise this in UK law after we leave the EU." And just last week, the Animal Welfare Minister, who I'm glad to see is in his place, told the EFRA Committee that the government was committed to legislating as soon as possible and was looking for a vehicle to bring it forward. Today, Mr Speaker, I am providing that vehicle for the government. And if the Minister wants to take over from me in the driving seat, I'd be more than happy for him to do so. Turning to the detail now of what I am proposing, the bill recognises animal sentience and ensures that all vertebrates, cephalopods and decapods, including crustaceans, octopuses and squid,